in the last class, I have little things to finish from the last class. And what you have seen long. No ready. The universe is flat, so this is what we saw. And we said that this has come completely from radiation, right? That's why you had written gamma. But now we have seen that there is another species which is neutrino, for which also the density falls as to the -3, right? So we should change this to omega say relativistic, and you can calculate the omega relativistic right away because you know the energy densities. So this will be photon plus. So remember when we calculated photon, so omega gamma had a dependence on T to the 4th. So to calculate gamma naught, we had put in this T naught to the power 4 there. So if I want to calculate now the omega for neutrino, what I can do is I can divide the omega gamma by T naught to the power 4 and T naught gamma to the power 4 and multiply it by neutrino to the power 4. Understand? So this is basically what I am doing is from in terms of this I am writing down the omega for the neutrinos. And there will be one more factor here, which is the factor that comes because the energy density of the fermions are different from the energy density of the bosons, which is 7/8.
No.
And then there are 3 different neutrinos, or if you have n different neutrinos, this will be n nu. So there are 3 different neutrinos. There will be a factor of 3. Right? So I can take this common. This is what I get. And this, as we have seen, that the neutrinos are smaller in number compared to the. So this changes. Okay, you just put in this number. I don't have the correct number written in my notes, but this we have seen what it will be. One is some 11/4 to the 1/3 or something, right? So this is 11. So if you put that number here, you can calculate what is R naught. So how much you have to correct for this particular number. Okay. So once you do that, so now I have replaced this by omega R naught. And I am going to very high redshift, very high Z, very small a. And I am going to a place where these are the terms which are important. This is not important. Because it's very high A, so these factors will be very large and this will drop out. In that case, I can now calculate at what point these two terms will have equal contribution. What I am doing is, if you remember, I plotted different rows as a function of A, and so this was radiation. So this was matter. So this is -4, this is -3, and we are plotting in log scale. And then you had lambda, which is constant. So we are working here where lambda is already not very important. And then we are asking at what point this transition occurs. So the matter dominated universe go to the radiation dominated universe, and that you can do by doing this simply. I think I had asked you to do also, but at that time I didn't give you what is this. You know that number now. You can equate these two to find a and the corresponding temperature. So find a corresponding Z, and then you know T at that Z is 1 plus Z T0, so you can find the temperature corresponding to that. Do all this, Z will come out to be about 10,000. So this, just bear in mind, because in a short while we'll go to that universe and see what will happen there. So it's Z 10,000 is the matter radiation equality. For higher Z, you can only think of this term. It's only matter dominated. And we know, if you remember, we know on a matter dominated universe, how does the scale factor change with T? By 3. How does it change for a, oh sorry, the universe is radiation dominated there. So for a radiation dominated universe, how does the scale factor change with? So it changes with e to the half, right? Fine. We'll just do two side comments. So what we have seen is that when we discussed the thermal equilibrium of CMB, we said that we need to explain that horizon problem, that is the fact that CMB is very, very isotropic up to 10 to the minus 5 if you take away the dipole factor. To explain that, you have to evoke the idea of inflation, where all this, the entire observable patch in CMB was in a very tiny universe, a tiny place in the universe, where it was causally connected, and that's how it has become so isotropic. And then we said that the fluctuations that you see in CMB were also created at those very early stage of the universe, and those were quantum fluctuations. Right? We also said that. Now it is sometimes also assumed that this lambda that we are talking about is also a product of quantum fluctuations, or this is vacuum expectation value of the. So vacuum expectation, vacuum is, so when what we say vacuum is in quantum mechanics, if you think of it, it also have a energy. So in quantum mechanics you always have a 0 point energy, or the, what you call it, the ground state energy, right? So vacuum also have a ground state energy, and this lambda is thought to be a product of that, which happened at that very early form. Now, to remember what is lambda, lambda we had put into the Einstein equation, and the rho for lambda was right? Rho for lambda was this. Now, if you calculate, so we know the dimension of rho, right? We know the dimension of C and G. If you calculate the dimension of lambda, it comes out to be L to the minus 2. And we know more. We know what is omega lambda today. So I can as well as calculate a mass for lambda using the constants h cross C and G. comes out to be of the order of this is the units of electron volt. And as I said that these are believed to be, this lambda is believed to be a product of those vacuum fluctuations, and that happened at very, very small scales and at very, very early universe, and at that time the relevant mass of these fluctuations is the Planck mass, which is of the order of 10 to the 28 eV. And what you are evoking is this vacuum fluctuations has created a mass for lambda, which is this. And that creates a problem, which is called the cosmological constant problem, that its value is very small. It's 10 to the 40 times smaller if you think of these units. And people will give you different values, but the main point is that the cosmological constant, as we see today, the value of lambda is very small. So that's a problem which will be addressed by whoever will teach you the inflation. Okay. So the other problem that we have is the following. So what does lambda do to the expansion of the universe? How does the A as a function of t? So this is exponential, right? And from that equation which I have removed, if you calculate, so now for the time being, so radiation was important. As we have seen, radiation was important at a redshift of 10,000. Say if we are talking about redshift of 10 and smaller, what is important is this matter and lambda. Right? Only these two are important. So again we can ask the question, at what z the transition to lambda occurred. Right? So what z the universe will become cosmological constant dominated from the matter dominated. And if you calculate that, that will come out to be very recent. So that z will come out to be around 0.3, which is very recent in the history of the universe. Now what does lambda do? It makes the universe expand exponentially, right? So it's like taking things further and further apart. Now think of the history of the universe. What's happening is, so after the CMBR, at the time of CMBR, we said that there are these tiny fluctuations in the matter density, which Dick have been talking about. And then these tiny fluctuations under gravitational instability, they started growing. Wherever you have more matter, they will grow. They will keep on accumulating more matter there. So your density contrast delta will keep on growing. That is your D plus, or the D as a function of P that Dick have been telling you. Right? Now assume that the Z was not 0.3, but say the Z was like 10 to the, say 5,000. CMBR is at 1,000, 1100, right? Say Z is at 5,000. So what will happen then? Z is at 5,000, your universe is already dominated by lambda. It will keep on increase exponentially. So whatever matter will try to collapse, the expansion will take it away. So your matter will not be able to collapse anymore. So you will not be able to create the structures that you see in the universe. The sheer fact that this is very present, this is after most of the structure formation has occurred in the universe, all the structure formation, so to say, that gives you the universe that you live in. So if it has happened like at z equals to 100, you will not see the universe that you see today. So this is a kind of coincidence problem, that this z being very close to 0, just because of that fact, all the matters are formed in the universe. So you have to tune this to be very close to 0 to see the matters in the universe. So that is called the coincidence problem in cosmology. Okay, these are the problems. And now we shall very briefly discuss about that radiation dominated era. And so we'll start with, we'll talk about radiation dominated era. And we ask the question, what are the elements are the elements in the periodic table, hydrogen, helium, etc., that will form in the radiation dominated era. So where are so we see all these elements, uranium, whatever, up to something 120 or something atomic number. So where are they formed? Most of them are formed in the stars. In the stars you have nuclear fission reactions, and that gives you elements up to iron 56, and after that, even when you have supernova, then you can create the other elements up to whatever elements you see. But so as you said that when the universe was forming, it was cooling down. If like for hydrogen atoms, we talked about that there will be a time in the universe when the temperature is so low that this electron can now get bound to the proton in the hydrogen and form the hydrogen atom. So that may happen to all the elements. That we may think that will happen to all the elements, and we can create all the elements in the universe. But does it happen? That's the question that we will be asking now. What are how the elements are formed? So that's called Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Synthesis of the nucleus, different nucleus in the Big Bang. So this involves is the deuterium, and the deuterium will be, so deuterium is basically one neutron and one proton, right? So this reaction can happen. And you can have, you'll have neutrinos and all, but I'm not writing them now. Okay, now this reaction takes a long time. This reaction takes 2 minutes. So this conversion of creation of deuterium from neutron and proton takes 2 minutes. Takes the universe to an age of 2 minutes. You can see this happened at 1 second, this took 2 minutes to occur. So which means that the forward reaction rate is not that fast compared to the backward reaction rate. And if you ask the question how this is falling, the half-life of the neutrons, so all the neutrons have not get converted to proton yet, there are a lot of neutrons left. And the half-life of neutron is around 900 seconds, which basically means that in 2 minutes, which is how much? 60 into 2, 120 seconds, all the neutrons have not get converted to proton. But some of them have gone to, and your neutron and to proton ratio at that time has fallen to 1/7. Okay, so we have created deuterium, and then he said that this has, now the neutron to proton ratio is 1/7. Okay, so if you ask the question, what is the Q value or what is the binding energy of deuterium, it's 2.22 electron volt. and if you calculate what temperature it would have happened, you will see this is more than 1.24 mega MeV. Sorry, this is MeV also. This is more than this, so this should have happened earlier. But then the fact that there is the forward reaction rate is not as high as compared to the backward reaction rate. This took up to the universe to cool down to 0.1 MeV, which is this 2 minutes, wherever I have written it down. 2 minutes. Okay. So once that has got created, so that took a long time. That's fine. Elements, photons and neutrinos are they almost don't have any mass. Photon doesn't have any mass. Neutrino almost doesn't have mass. So how do you create helium-4? So this will require 2 protons plus 2 neutrons. Right? And this is created from deuterium, plus protons plus neutrons. And this reaction rate is very fast. So it's so fast that that ratio n by p almost you can consider to be constant during the time when this got created, helium got created. So there are lots of reactions involved actually. So I am not writing down the reactions separately. I am just saying that a deuterium, proton and neutron, they have created helium. So if you want to do the calculations properly, you have to write down all the reactions, reaction rates, and how these different elements are changing with time. So all those things you have to put back in to get the right factors. We are just trying to do a very rough thing. So neutron to proton ratio was 1/7. So let us ask the question, what will be the mass of helium then compared to the total mass, and total mass is basically these two. So whatever hydrogen was created, it was there, it's already there. So hydrogen is nothing but the protons. So then we created deuterium. Then we created helium. And we said almost all the deuterium was used up to create the helium. So deuterium I am not writing here. So what will be this mass? So you can consider the mass of neutron and mass of proton to be same. So I can write this is 4 into mass of whatever neutron or proton times how many of them? N of them, and n number of helium atoms. And here also mass, same mass, proton and neutron mass are same, n number of helium plus n number of hydrogen. Right? How many, what will be this number? This is very easy to guess. In terms of the protons and neutrons neutron numbers. Where? 4 in. Heliums can be created. Of course, n by 2, right? Each helium requires 2 neutrons. The mass, of course, cancels out. I have the 4. This is number of neutrons by 2. Sorry. Yeah. Right. And this will be, of course, the total number of neutrons plus total number of protons. Nothing else is there, right? So this is 2n. I just do a combinatorial. And if you put back 1/7 over there, what you get is 1/4. This is approximate 25%. So what should you see? You should see So if I look at a part of the universe where it has not evolved, it has not changed its hydrogen or helium abundance. So these things are called abundance, this mass abundance of helium. Helium abundance much, then I should see there are 25%, that helium abundance is 25%. Right? So the actual number is what you can get from the calculation is 0.24 plus minus 0.01. And this actually only depends on these things, that only depend on this thing, and this thing I wrote down how N and P ratios are dependent, so that has a delta M C squared by kBt, right? So that was how, and this only depends on delta M C squared, and you know how T changes as a function of time. So which basically means that this thing, this 25%, so the helium abundance being 25%, is something which is very sacrosanct. So you should see 25%, whatever the baryon to proton ratio, whatever everything else, if you know the mass difference between neutron and proton, which is of course known very accurately. And indeed, when it was observed, so you can look at the galaxies which are which have not formed lot of stars. So you have less amount of metals in those galaxies. If you look at those at high redshifts, you actually see this is what the helium abundance is, which is an independent confirmation of the Big Bang theory. Because this has nothing to do with anything that you have. I mean, this has nothing to. This has only thing. This has to do is that you are living in a radiation-dominated universe, and what is the mass difference between N and P. Okay. So what about deuteron? So if I one more interesting thing comes, which is the last thing I will discuss in the nucleosynthesis. So when this helium, so I said that deuterons, then protons plus neutrons, they create this helium 4. But again, so there are some radiation, and this radiation dissociates the helium 4, and so there is a finite amount of backward reaction rate, so that makes some of the deuteron to escape. Okay, so some deuteron escapes. When He4 are formed. What does it depend on? It depends on how much of this is there, right? And that is related to the thing eta, which is of course the baryon to matter, number density of baryon to number density of gamma, right? That's what we define. So now what you can do is, I can do the calculations properly. I can find out what should be the escaped number of deuterons or abundance of deuterons given a value of eta or given a value of baryon number density. Remember, when we calculated N gamma, we could write it down completely in terms of, so N gamma omega gamma 0, we could write it down completely in terms of T to the 4 and other fundamental constants. But when we said this, we had this factor hanging, which you have to put in by observation. And we said that we will put in by observation of, say, the supernova data or CMB or whatever. Now what I am saying is that we have found a quantity which is the deuteron abundance, which also depend on the eta, which means it also depend on this. Now if I can Now if we can estimate or observe the deuteron abundance, again in some galaxies where you have very less metal, so the universe has not evolved much, then I can estimate omega baryon from that, right? So I can write down omega baryon from the deuteron abundance. And deuterons cannot be created inside a star. So that is also very important. So deuterons are not created inside a star because the condition for the reaction is not there inside a star. So whatever deuteron you see today is created in Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Okay. So this number you can measure. And this was found to be not this, but omega baryon naught H square. This is what was observed from the deuteron abundance. And yeah, so this bound or this value of omega baryon naught H square comes from just Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Again, I'm stressing that fact. And if you now you can also measure this thing from something called say CMB. Okay. So if you measure this thing from CMB, it matches exactly with this value. And that is a remarkable fact, and that is kind of more confirmation of the Big Bang theory you are doing. Because CMB gives you omega baryon from the structure formation scenario. And this gives you omega baryon from the nucleon formation scenario or the Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Okay. Now the other two things which could be found are helium-3 and lithium-7 in the Big Bang nucleosynthesis. You just add more proton and neutron and you start forming these. But when you go beyond lithium-7, unfortunately, there is no stable nuclei of nucleon numbers 5, 8, like that. And as you can imagine, as you put in more and more proton there, so there is always a electrostatic barrier that you have to overcome, the Coulomb barrier that you have to overcome, which is Z square by R square, right? So this basically is Z square by R square. So as you go to helium, lithium, and whatever next to lithium, the Z increases, so this barrier also increases. Because of these two factors, and when you have formed lithium, your universe has cooled down enough, and you cannot form the other elements. The next element, to form the next element, which I forgot which one is found, but whatever it is, you need to do something called triple alpha reaction, where you have to use 3 of these to form the next elements, which can only occur in the star. So this is all you create. So you create hydrogen, you create helium-3, you create helium-4, create deuteron, and you create lithium-7. And that's all. Nothing else is created because of Big Bang nucleosynthesis. And okay, I'll basically stop here, but I'll just write down. So we said that He4 is around 25%, 24 point something. And you can calculate the density or the abundance for all of them. And okay, so let me write this in terms of 0.25 because I have the other numbers like that. He3 is around 10 to the minus 5. Lithium is around 10 to the minus 10. You can see it's enormously small. But the same thing you did with deuteron to find the omega baryon from deuteron. In principle, you should be able to do it with lithium, but the problem is that lithium can also be created in star. So it's not that straightforward, it's messy. You can see this is 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 5, so these two you can neglect if you do that. So hydrogen is rest of it. And that's all is created with Big Bang nucleosynthesis. So I will basically stop here.
Minutes, but I have to squeeze it in 55 minutes or maybe so. But good thing is that many of the things I have already covered yesterday in that tutorial. Okay, and that will be useful here. So before I discuss this thing, I just want to point you towards some resources that one question is they're asking that which book to follow. Then here is a book by Crude and Son, cosmology book. And last chapter of it is totally focused on data analysis. So if you just read those 30-40 pages, then you will understand. I mean, you will learn some of the basic techniques. Then here is a with Max Tegmark. Is a professor in MIT. You just check his web page. He has a data analysis center. So there are many interesting resources available there. I mean, there are links to other websites also and course also. And for theory, there is a YNU CMB Theory Center. It's a web page. So you will get a lot of interesting things there. And I will say that you can visit my web page also. This is ICA. You go to ICA web page and you just go to the MD. And then there are web pages for CMB and other things which I haven't tested it. So I will post my presentation there as well as some examples, programs, tutorials, and my notes are also available on this page. Basic cosmology notes, so you can, although they are not proofreaded, there may be mistakes, but you can still go through them and you will get a complete package of cosmology. So, okay, so what is the CMB data analysis all about? As I told you that we have time order data, and from the time order data we can create maps. Okay, from maps we create what is called the power spectrum or angular power spectrum, band power spectrum, and from power spectrum you create these parameters or you estimate parameters. So what is happening is that at every stage there is reduction in the data volume by huge factor and no information is lost. So that is a claim. If your data analysis technique is efficient, okay, and that's not true for all data analysis techniques. If you take a very poor data analysis technique, so that may not preserve the information. Like if you have a time order data, okay, some time series, if you do its Fourier decomposition and just record the values of various Fourier amplitude in some range, okay, not all Fourier in amplitude, then you will have less data volume but full information. You can actually recover the signal from that. Okay, I mean, I will give just simple example that this is a sinusoidal curve. Okay, it has the amplitude and it has a frequency. And if you have these many data points, this is time and this is xt, for example. Okay, so there may be 1000 data points. So you have t, xt. There are 1000 lines of it. But rather than just recording this whole thing, you can record the frequency as well as amplitude of that thing. With just two numbers and you completely represent your signal. So that is also some sort of a data analysis or data reduction. So next, so this is one stage. You have time order data directly coming from satellite or the instrument. Basically, time order means at what time which pixel was observed. That is the information which we have. And it's a huge volume, it may be 10 to the power 10 numbers and more, maybe more than that. Then you make maps. I will show how you do that. Then you compute this in power spectrum and all rest of it. So these techniques I have, some of these things I have already explained to you yesterday, that there are forward problems and there are inverse problems. Inverse problem is essentially like recovering the signal from the data, okay, or estimating the parameters of the theoretical model which you have, or it may be deconvolution also. For example, there is some data, something is happening, and you have an instrument, okay, and you observe things from that instrument. Then the property CMB data and map making, and then I will go on discussing cosmological parameter estimation, which is the main thing there. So I told you that data can be like a time series or the temperature map of the sky. So this is our data, and there is a theoretical model which is represented by some parameter. Theoretical model is represented by parameters. Here we will represent these parameters by theta. Okay, one of its example is a Gaussian process. For example, if we have a Gaussian model, theoretical model, its data, and this model is represented by or characterized by just two parameters, is the mean and variance. Okay. So we may try to estimate the value of this mu and sigma on the basis of some data. Or we can have any other linear or non-linear model. For that, finding out which of the theoretical model is better than other, we should be fitting a parabola rather than a line is different from finding the parameters of a model. Okay, so there are two different issues, that which of the models is better and what are the parameters of a given model. So here our discussion is mainly focused on estimating the parameters of a model. We are not asking whether lambda CDM model is correct or not. Okay, we assume that it's correct. That is taken. Now question is, what are the values of lambda CDM cosmological model? Means what are the values of Hubble parameter, baryon density, cosmological constant, and other things. Finding parameters of a theoretical model from data is called the inverse problem, and it's harder to solve than the forward problem. I mean, you know that if you have that Gaussian thing, if you know this mu and sigma, then you can generate actually the data. If you have ever used these Gaussian random number generators, they just need these two things, then you can create the data. So I explained it, a problem can be linear or non-linear problem. In this case, it's a linear problem. This is the data, and these CJR, these are the parameters of theoretical model. And linear models are easier to solve than the non-linear models, because in this case we just get linear equations. We can use the matrix algebra, we can solve the problem. And I again told you that number of data points are n, number of parameters of our theory are m, and then on the basis of which of these conditions is true, okay, the problem may be easier or harder to solve, or may not be possible to solve at all. Okay. So in case of CMB, that is not the problem for us, because we have large number of data points and our model parameters are very less in number. Like finally we will have just 10 or 20, or in fact best fit cosmological parameter, cosmological model is represented by just 6 or 7 parameters. And one of the common methods to solve this inverse problem is this: minimize a measure of misfit. Okay, which is like, this can be a chi-square minimization or anything else. you can minimize any other misfit also. So this is how it goes, at least for a linear model. This is data, this is a transformation matrix, this is a theoretical parameters, and this is noise. Okay. So we can create a misfit function, like here I create this fp. Okay, which I say that data minus this thing, essentially it's noise. So transformation of this matrix and multiply by it. Okay. So what I mean that if you have a y is equal to ax plus b, so we can y minus ax transpose y minus ax, I can call this function as fx. I can minimize this function with respect to x and compute the value of x. That is exactly what it is written. Okay. And again, it is it's an exercise for you that if you minimize this thing, then the best fit solution will be given by this. Okay. You can see that slightly chi-square minimization gives you slightly better answer, and for chi-square minimization, our this cost function will be this one, chi-square, and I think everything is familiar. It's the data minus transformation matrix, this d minus at, it's noise vector transformation, and this is again noise vector, d minus at is essentially noise, and there is inverse weighting by noise. This Cn is noise covariance matrix. So if it is diagonal, it's like in chi-square we get 1 by sigma square. That is exactly what it is. Okay, but here I have written the complete covariance matrix, because in the case of CMB, data points may be correlated. Okay, so that thing has to be taken into account when we write the covariance matrix. And the solution which we get by minimizing this chi-square is called maximum likelihood solution. I will explain why it is called maximum likelihood also. Although it's a chi-square minimization, minimum chi-square solution or maximum likelihood solution. And it is left you for an exercise to show that the noise covariance matrix is given by this thing and is equal to this thing. So how you compute noise if you have a random vector x? So if you sigma x square will be like x square this thing minus x this thing. I think you people are familiar with this expression at least, how this sigma is computed, but it can be generalized for covariance when the data points are correlated. So there is one interesting properties of Gaussian random numbers. If x is a Gaussian random number, Gaussian random variable, you have a large number of Gaussian random variables. You square and sum them, and obviously you will get another random number. Okay, this random number y. If x follows Gaussian distribution, then if this xi individually follow Gaussian distribution, then y will follow chi-square distribution. Okay, so this is
standard random
what?
xi will be a standard random
Distribution function. So I will again come back to this point that why I am discussing this thing, why it is relevant for CMB. So I already explained it that CMB anisotropies are characterized by this delta T by T. Okay, this is the temperature fluctuation along the direction n hat. And these anisotropies can be decomposed into multipoles. Here these YLM, these are the spherical harmonic decomposition, and these are amplitude. So essentially whatever information is available in this delta T by T or the temperature map, that information is available in ALM also. So either we use this or we use this, we don't lose any information. Okay. And there are some interesting properties of these amplitudes. What are the property? First thing is that they follow Gaussian distribution. They are Gaussian random numbers, and it comes from theory and other things. There are more, and they have zero mean, and their variance is given by CL. Okay, this CL is called angular power spectrum. So in the sense that CMB anisotropies are completely characterized by this CL, like any Gaussian probability distribution can be characterized by its mean and variance. Mean is 0 here, variance is nothing but CL, and we can make an unbiased estimator of CL is given by this one. So what I mean unbiased is that if you take the expectation value of this thing, an estimator, and if it goes toward the true value, then it is called unbiased estimator. So again that will take,
Sir, yes. Here the correlation matrix.
there is a technique for estimating parameter, it's called maximum likelihood estimation. In order to understand that, you will need to understand what is called the Bayes theorem and how it comes. If you have a data D and you have a theoretical model represented by parameter theta, then probability of getting a set of parameters given the data D, it's a conditional probability, is given by this one. This is called Bayes theorem, and again, I mean, there is no need to prove it here, but this is how these probabilities are written. Okay, you can easily prove this theory. So what we are interested in? We are interested in probability distributions for parameters. Okay. What we are interested is like this one. If this is a, of course, it's the probability distribution, it will go from 0 to 1. Okay. We want to find out for every cosmological parameter of the lambda CDM model, we want to find out this thing, probability distribution like omega lambda. Okay. What is its mean value and how much is the error in the estimated value? That's what we are interested in. Essentially, Bayesian analysis, it doesn't make sense to say exactly this is the value of a cosmological or whatever parameter, theoretical parameter. What we say that how much confidence we have in this parameter. Okay, it's our belief, how much confidence we have in that value. Okay. So that essentially means we are looking for probability distributions for parameters, cosmological parameters. And that is exactly what it is here, that we, given a data set D, we want to know that P theta. Okay, so we are interested in this thing. But from this Bayes theorem, we can see that this P theta given D is equal to P D given theta. They are proportional to each other. Okay, you can ignore this part simply, it does not depend on the theory. This part is what is called the prior. What we already know about the parameters, some parameter. For example, we already know that cosmological constant should be between, for example, 0.5 and 0.7. Okay. So this will be our prior. This thing. And then we will multiply that prior with something called likelihood. What is the probability of obtaining a data set which we have given a theoretical model? Okay. So we have a theoretical model. Okay. And obviously we can create data from there. You know what is called the simulation in some sort of. And then we have the actual data also. So we ask this question, what is the probability of getting the actual data which we have given that theoretical model? So this is called likelihood. Okay, I called it LD theta. here you can clearly see what does it mean. This is our prior. Before carrying out the experiment, you can say that it has mean value of 50 and it's very wide. So in Bayesian data analysis, we cannot work in completely ignorance. We must have some prior information available. Like, I mean, there is nothing called like you just go there and measure the value of Hubble constant. Okay. Before actually doing that, you must know that, okay, Hubble constant should be in this range. Or you can specify this thing also, that this guy should look like Gaussian, that I strongly believe that the value of this guy should be close to 15. Okay. And it's very unlikely that it will be 10 or 90. That is my prior belief. Now from the data I compute the likelihood. Likelihood depends on theory as well as data. Okay. So then it gets multiplied by that and I get the posterior. So you can that this black curve is posterior. So after the data has been incorporated, I can strongly say that the value of parameter should be actually 70 and there is almost no chance that it is 10. So the data which we have completely rules out. Okay, the value of, you can see that this guy is, this black curve is just falling here, it has almost zero value here and here. So that is the purpose of experiment, that to reduce the uncertainty. That's all what we want to do. Every experiment, every new data set will some sort of make us confident about the value of something. It will remove some uncertainty, like WMAP data and other data is coming. So many of the models are out of business basically. There is very less chance they are correct. Okay. So in data analysis, or in general I will say in science, we cannot prove things, but we always try to disprove things. That's how things go. You put a model there, I can disprove it. Although I cannot prove my model that, okay, it will remain always true. That's very hard to say, that if you have a theoretical model and you say that once and for all it's always true. That's not true. So given the data what we have, given the observations what we have, this is the status we can say. But obviously then later on, if we get some better data which contradicts with our theoretical model, we must tweak that model or modify that. So likelihood function, as I told you, is a function of data and the parameter. But for simplicity, I just drop the d from here. Okay, it's there, we understand likelihood, and I write this likelihood function as a function of parameters. Okay, just keep this thing in mind that d and theta are actually the vectors. Theta is not just one parameter, it's a parameter vector, and d is also vector. So you can tell or expand it. Okay. So we are trying to find out what is the value of the model parameters for which the likelihood is maximum. Simply that is our question. We are trying to maximize the likelihood. So we expand likelihood in this way, and then we differentiate it. Then obviously when the likelihood will be maximum, the first derivative will be 0, and this will be the value at that point at which the likelihood function is maximum, and this is the second derivative. So just for information, this second derivative, it's called the Hessian matrix. And there is a theorem or rule called Cramer-Rao lower bound, which says that no matter what the estimator you have for a parameter, okay, the variance on it will always be greater than 1 by this matrix I, where matrix I is directly related to this Hessian matrix. Okay. So without going into technicalities, what does it mean? Is that assume that this is your chi-square. This is your parameter theta. Okay, chi-square will most likely look like Gaussian. So the error on these parameters will be always less than the variance of this Gaussian. I mean, that will be clear from the next two lines. And now there are a few problems and you can try them out. I will put these slides somewhere. This problem I gave you for an exercise yesterday. This thing that you hit this line y is equal to C0 plus C1x with this data, and so that C0 is given by this one, C1 is given by this one, where capital S is this, and this S01 and S10 are defined in this way. Okay, so you can try out to find these things by using those two different methods. One is directly chi-square minimization, second is that matrix method. Sometimes likelihood is not much sensitive to individual parameters, but it is highly sensitive to some combination of those parameters. Okay, now just imagine likelihood is like a surface, okay, what we call the likelihood surface. And there is no reason that why this surface should look like a Gaussian surface or a parabola type of thing. I mean, log likelihood will look like parabola, but there is no reason for that. If you have some sort of chosen some bad parameters, okay, likelihood may not look Gaussian. But if you just use some other parameters, then likelihood may look Gaussian. So in cosmological parameter estimations, you may have encountered combination like omega b h square, like if you read WMAP 9-year paper or some other paper. Rather than measuring WB or H, they just measure omega b h square and all these things, because the likelihood is much more sensitive to these combinations than their individual values. Like likelihood is sensitive to something called as A star, and which is a combination of large number of other parameters like this N as the spectral index of scalar power spectrum index, and this reionization optical depth.
So how to define the star and
Okay, so what is the issue? Once you have this likelihood function, this is a multivariate probability distribution function. Okay, so data and theory together will give you a probability distribution function. P, forget about the D, P as a function of theta, and theta is a vector. If you are, once you, I mean, you know this thing, once you have probability distribution for something, like you have P theta, so you have the full information about that variable. If you ask this question, what is its mean value, you just take its expectation. And if you ask question, what is error on it, you can do that also. Like I have written this expression, x square expectation minus x expectation square. So that will give you this thing. But the question is that here I have written this d theta, but this is a multi-dimensional integral. Okay, it will be, if there are 10 parameters, so it will be 10-dimensional integral, and it's a complicated thing, 10-dimensional integral. What does it mean? If along every dimensions, if you take 10 points, okay, and there are 10 dimensions, so in integration you will have 10 to the power 10 points. Okay, and computing a function at 10 to the power 10 points is very expensive or may not be feasible. Then we have to do some trick. I think people have understood this thing, that why these n-dimensional integrals are difficult to do. If you write this d and x and some fx something, okay, it may be vector. So actually there will be this 10 thing. So the computational cost grows exponentially, all these type of integration. So it looks that this is impossible to do
to follow this approach, then here comes, okay, before I go on the simplification of this integration, there is something called marginalization. So we have probability distribution for the entire parameter vector, okay, multi-dimensional probability distribution. But what we are interested is in one-dimensional probability distributions, like this one, so that we can compute individual mean and variance for every parameter. So how to go from multi-dimensional probability distribution functions to one-dimensional probability distribution function? There is something called marginalization, and that is nothing but we just integrate out rest of all the parameters. If you have parameter from theta 1 to theta m, and you are interested just in p theta r, we just do this integral and all those will go away. But again, this thing still remains challenging, whether you do this integral or this integral. This will be n minus 1 dimensional integral and this is n dimensional integral. So we have to do something to reduce the computational cost. And there is something called sampling. Particularly there is something called Markovian Monte Carlo method. And it's just part of a family of Markov Monte Carlo integration. Okay. And this is a very interesting problem itself. I mean, how many of you are familiar with this Monte Carlo integration? Is anyone familiar? No? Yeah. So, one interesting problem is that, do you know that you can compute the area of this circle by this thing Monte Carlo integration? This is a very simple thing that you know area of this thing, you draw random numbers. Okay, just throw them and just see that how many of them fall here and how many of them fall here. Okay, and from that ratio actually you can find what will be its, this thing, what will be its area. You are not using any formula like pi r square or something of that type. You just know the boundary of something. And that may be true for other thing also. In fact, if you know the boundary of some very odd type of this thing curve, and you have to find its area. Now what you do again, in case of circle at least there is a formula, here there is no formula. You can use this Monte Carlo integration. And actually when there are very large number of points, you will find that the actual answer is very close to the answer which you get from this Monte Carlo integration. In particular, it's very useful for doing higher dimensional integration. You can again throw the points, but yeah, exactly it's the same thing we do here, but here there is another thing called the Markov chain. So what we do, we have a likelihood function and we have to carry out integration of this likelihood function, and of course parameter is put there. We sample that function and we sample it in such a way that we have large number of points when the value of the function is large and less number of points when the value of the function is small, and that is done by something called Markov chains. What are these Markov chains? So generally if you toss a coin, okay, and just record the data, so every event will be independent from past events. Like if 10th time you get head, then 11th time you can get anything. It doesn't matter what you have got at 8th or 9th time. But these Markov chains are some special type of random number sequences where the nth outcome is closely connected to n minus 1th outcome. Just n minus 1th outcome, not earlier one. Okay, and then you form a chain like the probability of I mean the same thing is probability of getting this random number xn depends on the probability of getting this random number at xn minus 1. Okay, I mean it's a convention that when we write a capital X, then that says it's a random variable, but when we write small x, then it says that it's a realization of that random variable. Okay, so here you can see that this thing is, here it's the nth outcome, this is n minus 1th outcome, but there is a function between them which is called transition probability, okay, which will take you from this n minus 1 step to nth step, and then you can do this thing and you can actually form a chain. So it's a multi-dimensional parameter space. You can actually move in this space by doing these chains. And for example, this transition probability which will take you from, it reminds me quantum mechanics also. In quantum mechanics, you have this thing that there is the initial state and there is a final state. Okay, and then there is a function transition probability which take you from initial to final. That comes e to power Hamiltonian and something. So that's exactly what it is. Precisely, this is the transition probability, which can be taken as a Gaussian also. Okay, in most cases, of course, you can take any other transition probability also. So what is happening that you are at some point, and from that you make a Gaussian jump. Means you call a Gaussian random number generator, and from that you make the jump, and there is a algorithm called Metropolis Hastings algorithm, which does this thing. But this transition probability has a parameter called sigma. Okay. So how big jump you want to make from one step to another step, that you have to decide. Okay. That's the parameter of this. You don't want to take it too small, otherwise you will not sample the entire this thing space. Okay, you will just stuck somewhere, and you don't want to take some very large value of sigma, otherwise you will miss many things in between. Like if you have a function, and if you do very narrow sampling of it, like in numerical integration, it will take unnecessarily too much time. Okay, but if you take too big jump, that is also not good. Okay, you will miss these features in between. So that has to be decided carefully. Anyway, this paper is there is a paper by Anthony Lewis and in 2002 paper, and on this paper there is a code written called Cosmo MC. Okay. So I will directly go on that Cosmo MC part, and I will not explain this Metropolis Hastings algorithm. You can find it out how it works. So now in cosmology, what is happening that yesterday I talked about two codes called CMB fast and CAM. They compute theoretical angular power spectrum, CLs. Okay, and if you remember that, then I made a box here which can be CAM or CMB fast. It takes cosmological parameters as input and it gives these CLs as output. Okay, so no data is needed for this one. Just to download, it's a Fortran code of less than 1 megabyte size, and you can run it. It's a Fortran. You need the Fortran compiler for this one. This CMB fast was written earlier, and CAM is a recent one. So you compute these CLs, and then actually you use this Bayesian theorem here. Theoretical parameters are our CLs, and data is our CMB temperature. Okay, and this thing I already explained. So this equation goes in this, and now again we write this thing that probability of this thing is again taken as Gaussian. We have taken Gaussian likelihood, which can be written in this way. And if we take the covariance matrix of these two guys, as I already told you that in the case of CMB, covariance matrix is directly related to the CL. And again, detail is given in these references. And there is a lot of background is also given there. So in any case, we can make an estimator of CL. We have observation, from observation we get temperature, from temperature we do the multiple decomposition, we get the ALMs, observed ALM, from that we can get one CL hat. Now we have one theoretical CL coming from here and one observational CL coming from here. So we can match them and try to find out which of the cosmological parameter set is correct. Okay. Then again you make a chi-square out of these guys, and as always chi-square depends on the theory as well as an observational data, and it's just an exercise. You write a Gaussian this thing, you take log of it and you get something of this thing. But there are complexity like the finite resolution of the detector, so it will get modified by many other factors like this sensitivity, detector noise. There will be cut sky due to our galaxy. And there are many wide sources also, like stars and many other bright objects which spoil the CMB map. What CMB map we actually get from the instrument like WMAP is not what we actually see in the paper. It's heavily contaminated. Okay, right in the middle of the map there is a band due to our galaxy, because galaxy also emits in the same frequency range, like there is a synchrotron radiation coming from the galaxy, there is free radiation coming from the galaxy, there is a radiation coming from dust. All these things are there. So generally these cosmological parameters are estimated by codes like Cosmo MC. It's a Markov chain Monte Carlo code. Generally it needs very good computing facility, like if you have a cluster it's better. And it may be difficult to run this code on a laptop, but people have run it. I mean, it will run for a few days. And again, this thing is discussed in detail in this WMAP first year paper. There is a cosmological parameter estimation paper from WMAP first year data, where they have discussed the techniques. And then what we get finally, we get something of these are cosmological parameters. Okay. All of these parameters, they affect theoretical CL. If you change one parameter, theoretical CL will be different. And then you may be away from, you may not fit with the observed CL, which I showed that it's a CL hat. It's a physical baryon density, dark matter density, it's the theta, there is a last scattering surface from which the CMB photons are coming, and it has a angular size, theta, which also depend on the cosmological, which also affect the CLs, and there are all sorts of parameters. Cosmo MC has 20 parameters which can be estimated from a CMB data set like WMAP. Yeah. So how it goes, like this is a typical Markov chain. When you run that code Cosmo MC, it gives you in multidimensional parameter space. There are points which are called chains basically. Basically these points evolve with time. Okay. So here you can see that these are the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is some parameter, maybe omega b h square. So in that along that dimensions, omega b h square, this guy moves in this way, this chain moves in this way, and then there are many other chains. Finally you just, and not only that, when the chain progresses, the chi-square also drops. Okay. So what you are interested in, there is a multi-dimensional parameter space, and there is a point at which the likelihood is maximum. Now we don't know what that point is. Our goal is to reach there. Okay, to reach there where that point is, at which the likelihood is maximum. So we carry out these random walks, which are here called Markov chains. Okay, so finally, no matter from where we start, from where the chain starts, this thing, the maximum of likelihood will attract that, and that is guaranteed by the algorithm which we are using. And when we reach there, you can see that the chi-square is falling. Okay, so finally, we will have two things. One thing is that we will know exactly where the likelihood is maximum, and second thing is that we will have some sort of collection of points also, sample also, and that sample we can use for computing the variance, which will tell you that how much errors are there in various parameters. For example, if sampling is very diffuse around that point at which the likelihood is maximum, we will say the error bars are large. But if the sampled points are very compact around that point, then we will say that error bars are less. So it's like probability distribution. Then we can get probability distribution for every parameter once we have these sampled points. Okay, and this is exactly how it looks in 2 dimensions, because this is n-dimensional data. So I cannot plot all the n-dimensional thing on this thing. So I have to cut the slices. I have to pick the pairs. Like in cosmology, there are parameters omega b h square, omega c h square, omega lambda, there is ns, there is as, there is tau, and there may be other parameters also. So at a one time I can just pick one pair and see the, and then obviously this is just a cosmetic thing that you can make contour also from this thing. Once you have this data spread. So I mean that was the Cosmo MC, and I will just show few pictures basically. This is the WMAP satellite. It has these telescopes, and it can measure temperature along 2 directions in the sky at a time. And its receiver is kept at very low temperature. Okay, so it's all the electronics and things are there. I don't want to go into the detail. And where this instrument is kept, this is Earth, this is Sun. So there is something called L2, second Lagrangian point. You can find out what this guy is. It's a very stable point. If you put any instrument there, it will remain there quite stable. It's put here. And this is the orbit of this instrument. It was actually, this is how it went there. Okay. Now it's out of service, but, and what it gave is these sky maps at these 5 frequency bands, 23 from 23 gigahertz to 94 gigahertz. In middle, you see that what this red color is the contamination due to our galaxy. Okay, so this contamination is stronger at lower frequency band as compared to higher frequency band. So we have to remove it, and we can use information from other experiments also. If we know that how this emissions is, we can just remove this thing. And this picture is from latest data release, 2013 WMAP 9-year data. And then from that map, you actually get this power spectrum. These data points are from WMAP 9-year data. Okay, and this is a theoretical model. This smooth curve. This is the best fit curve. Now we can some sort of reverse engineer this thing and ask what are the parameters for this best fit curve. Okay, so these parameters, they affect the CL, and then we get the best fit parameters. These are like this one. Yeah, we get this summary table. That omega BH square is this one, omega C is this. Anyway, there are some references, and I will stop here and will take 2 questions. Maybe we will not have any other session, but people can visit all these places and can explore themselves. And if there is any query later on also, you can ask me or maybe. Are there any questions or anything?